Let's bring in John McMullen. The two coordinators spoke today. We got new percentages. And, John, let's start off with that. Give our listeners a little insight onto what the Carolina loss means for the Eagles on Sunday.
Well, it was a big loss from the Eagles' perspective, the fact that they needed Carolina to lose one more game. So that part of the equation is very, very good. And now, really, to boil it down, if the Eagles win out, they just need to hope for one loss from Minnesota, and they will be a playoff team. So that would be the most easy scenario for them to get to the playoffs. And it's also not exactly out of the realm of possibility. It's not outrageous. It's certainly plausible. And we kept preaching week after week after week, the Eagles aren't out of this. The Eagles aren't out of this. A lot of that had to do with the competition. You mentioned how far Carolina has fallen. Minnesota has not been nearly as good as people expected. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Eagles are playing in January. And won't that create some fireworks?
It sure
Nick
will.
Foles leads this team to the postseason.
It would be crazy. By the way, the Eagles are now a favorite in this game. They began as an underdog, and they have since switched to a favorite in the game against the Texans. Now, the Texans are a pretty banged-up team all of a sudden coming in to this game, but you talked about it would create something here. And today, Mike Groh, the offensive coordinator. Now, most people aren't even sure what Mike Groh does, but
I'm not sure.
Right?
He does the same thing Frank Reich did. So, I mean, people love Frank Reich, and rightfully so, because I think Frank did a tremendous job here. And if people didn't devalue Frank Reich, I don't understand. Look, I don't think Mike has been great by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't understand the devaluation. He's doing the same job Frank Reich did. A lot of times it takes coaches time to grow into the position. I think you see it all the time with head coaches. I think you saw it with Doug Peterson.
Right. To be fair, I don't know that anybody was like, man, Frank Reich, that year that he was here when they were 7-9, I don't think anybody was like, wow, he was really good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people judge, and I talk about it all the time, mainly with play calling. If you think about play calling, when people say that's a good play call, that's a bad play call, all they're really doing is looking at the result of the play. And it's hard to wrap your head around. Maybe a good play call fails, and maybe a bad play call succeeds because of a great job by a particular player or something of that nature. So that kind of stuff is hard for people to wrap their head around. But Doug Peterson gave Mike Groh a ton of credit this week for scaling things back after the Dallas game, going back to basics, as he called it, and putting together a game plan that obviously got the Eagles not only probably the biggest win of the season, no doubt from an underdog perspective. That's a 2-touchdown underdog. You're not supposed to win that game. And that keeps them relevant in the playoff race, to the fact that some people will argue, despite they don't control their own destiny, it might be more likely than not that they make the postseason because they have a home game against a difficult opponent, but it is at home. And then Week 17 is against Washington. And if you look at Minnesota's road, they're a terrible road team. They have to go on the road against the Lions this week. So even though Detroit isn't that good, the Vikings don't play well away from home. And then Week 17 in Chicago was something to play for. And Chicago's got the best defense in the NFL.
John, he was asked today, Mike Groh, about when you put the game plan together, when you're in that room, is it different when Nick Foles is the quarterback versus Carson Wentz? We kind of discussed that in the first hour. Do they have a different set of plays? Do they call things differently? How did Mike Groh explain that?
Well, he explained it like it's obviously the offense doesn't change. You can't change your whole philosophy when you change quarterbacks, and that's part of the problem when you go a starter to backup because everybody's different. And he called it equated it to somebody whose favorite color might be blue as opposed to green, and everybody's got little things they like. And when it comes to Nick Foles versus Carson Wentz, the Eagles are never going to come out and say it because they don't want to alienate either side, depending on what's going well or what's not going well. They have different sort of personalities. Carson wants more autonomy at the line of scrimmage. He wants options. And Nick Foles just wants the play, and he wants to run the play. And he wants to get the football out of his hands. And really, if you think back to his success with Chip Kelly, that's what he would prefer, one read and go. And the Eagles understand that, and that's the main difference.
And you might have just answered it for me, John, but what's the reasoning behind – or what do you see with Foles to Alshon Jeffrey? Because it seems like Foles likes going to him more. Now, whether there is more to it, but I want to know what you see behind that. And because to me, it looks like Wentz lately, before he's been out here, that he's going to just one read. Like you kind of explained the opposite, but I just want you to elaborate on that because clearly he's been dealing with a knee and his back now, but it seems like he's going to Ertz quickly, and Foles Sunday getting the ball out of his hands quickly, but doing a little bit more of the opposite.
Well, I don't know if it was opposite, and it might have been just different players because
sure.
The targets went to Alshon as opposed to Zach, or vice versa. If you're still targeting one player, it's one player. The Eagles were successful, so it obviously looks good. And Nick talked about it, and he said, I think the term he used was trying to be bold and not trying to he understands, look, this team's got to win 3 games. Now it's 2 games. So there's nothing to lose. Mike said it when he picked the Eagles. They're playing with house money. There's nothing to lose. So you might as well go for it. And I think that was part of it. And it was the 50-50 ball back in play. And that's what the 50-50 ball is. And that's what Alshon does best. That's the best trait of his skill set. And Nick was willing to throw it. I haven't seen Carson being willing to throw that enough. But it wasn't, he saw Alshon open, except for, you could argue the big deep play where both Jeffrey and Aguilar were wide open on blown coverages, and it looked like a punt coming down. But he was willing to throw the 50-50 ball, and that's what you need to do when Alshon Jeffrey's on your team. So Nick deserves credit for it, and Carson should have been doing it more.
Is there anything that you saw on Sunday that – because everyone after this win is excited – it's overall the vibes.
Football season's back.
Yeah, it's back. We're positive. The vibe now is all of a sudden Super Bowl champs again, right? So, is there anything that we're overlooking? As
feels
fans
like training
here?
camp.
Woo! But that's the Ric Flair for you. But is there anything that we've overlooked here? What happened Sunday that could be cause for concern this following week, or something they need to do better?
Well, I don't think there's much cause for concern. Anytime you win as a 2-touchdown underdog, I mean, that's pretty good. People can nitpick and say they shouldn't have put the Rams in a position to tie the game on the last play. But, again, you're playing a very talented team, and for the most part, you did everything you wanted to do. So I think all of that is positive. I think if you look at this team throughout the year, the one issue they have is consistency from week to week. And they finally won 2 straight games before losing again. Now they got to find a way to win 3 straight. And they haven't been able to do that all year. So we'll see if they're able to get that consistency from week to week. And we'll see. We all know Nick Foles. I mean, Nick Foles is what he is. And you can kind of get a feel for, are we going to get the good Nick or the bad Nick? And if you get the bad Nick on a particular game day, well, it's going to be ugly. So you kind of have to wait and see till Sunday and see what team shows up.
What is your I know you've been vocal about how it's been criminal and somewhat egregious the way they've used Tate. But is this just because they deem Aguilar a better player than him, or they just still can't figure out what to do with him? You would think by now he would have a pretty, defined role in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear this coaching staff thinks Nelson Aguilar is a better player. This is 2 weeks in a row, and arguably Dallas was the most important game of the season, and Golden was out there for 20% of the snaps. Now they're playing for their playoff lives in Los Angeles. I think the number was 22%. He was very effective. He put up more production than Nelson, who played the entire game. So this is a clear disconnect between Howie Roseman, Doug Peterson. We haven't seen a lot of that yet during their sort of journey together. They've always been on the same page, but Howie did what he did, and he gave up a third-round pick for Golden Tate, and all of a sudden he gets here, and Doug Peterson looks at it for a couple weeks and says, nah, I'm good. I prefer Nelson on the field. That could be a problem to keep an eye on down the line. Not necessarily from the player's perspective. Golden's a free agent; he'll probably leave, and Nelson will be back in the role. But it does tell you something about the relationship and the fact that Howie thought this was a better fit, and he should be on the field. And Doug said, "I don't think he should be on the field."
Yeah, what we talked about this in the first hour. Like, did they look at the film, or did they know who he was and think that they can make this work, or did they have a disconnect right off the bat? Like, that's, I guess, where we need to try to get to the bottom of at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, and I always describe it as the off season is for Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas, and the season is for Doug Peterson. Ultimately, the trade is a Howie Roseman decision and happens to be in season. So clearly the Roseman-Douglas camp said this guy's better than what we have. And clearly the Peterson camp, which is the coaching staff, said, wait a minute, no, he's not. And if you want me to pick sides, I'm going to say Howie and Joe are right. And I got in trouble with Nelson for saying that, but it's just my opinion. I mean, Golden Tate's resume is Golden Tate's resume. And he's been a very successful receiver in both Seattle and Detroit, 3-time 1,000-yard receiver. He's played on the outside. He's had success on the outside. Nelson, on the other hand, has not had success on the outside. So there is the one thing the coaching staff will point to is the fact that Nelson has been here for years, knows the offense better. But Golden Tate, as I've said in the past, is no dummy. In fact, one of the strengths of his game is his football IQ. So it doesn't make sense. And then you add into the equation on those 22% of the snaps, Golden was very effective. 5 targets, 5 catches. And if you put him and Jeffrey together, it's 13 out of 13. That's where you sort of had the meat on the bone of the offense, at least the passing game part of it, against the Rams. And he's only on the field 20% of the time. It doesn't make a ton of sense.
Yeah. Well, this week, and I know Groh was asked, he said, I think someone asked him, like, from the eye test, it seems that you guys were taking more shots down the field, mostly more to Jeffrey. Was that the impression that you had? And he said, I don't think we took more than normal. And I don't know that I disagree with him. I just feel that they just connected this with. Like, I feel like Wentz takes some shots. He just overthrows, or they just don't connect. They just connected, so it makes you feel like they took more shots just because they connected on a few.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about shots. I think Mike is right from a numbers standpoint and the fact that they're taking shots, and you're right from the fact that, hey, you can take shots, but you got to put the ball in the position where the receiver has an opportunity to get it. And Nick did that, and Alshon did his job. And you saw from the other side of the coin, Jared Goff. I mean, last play of the game, you take a shot, but is it that you gave the receiver no chance? I mean, it's one thing to take a shot at the end zone, and that's not a deep ball, but it's the same theory. If you're going to give a 50-50 ball, you got to give the receiver as a quarterback, you got to give the receiver a 50% chance. If you give neither the receiver or cornerback any chance, it's really not a 50-50 ball. It's just an overthrown mess, but it's a shot. And I think that's what Mike was saying. They were just more successful as an offense, and I know people are going to get all hyped up and Super Bowl MVP and Nick Foles. I shouldn't say most people realize Carson's the better player, but for one night in a big spot, Nick Foles performed.
I think when people, and this isn't me, I'm just saying, I'm trying to jump in the heads of some of these people, which is scary to think about. But I think they almost acknowledge that Wentz is the more talented player. They just like Foles more. Just like him more.
Well, I think there's a couple different demographics to the so-called Folesian society. I think there's the demographic that you described. I also think there's a casual fan demographic that just looks at those results and says, well, Nick won the Super Bowl and Carson wasn't playing well, and then Nick comes in again. So Nick's obviously better. So I think you have that audience as well. So I think it's a combination. But look, from a trait standpoint, a skill set standpoint, we talked about the changes in offense, scaling things back. I mean, these coaches see these players every single day at practice, from the spring throughout where we are today, a week away from Christmas. And trust me, no one in that building, including Nick Foles, thinks Nick Foles is a starting quarterback of this team. So you could think all of those people are idiots or understand that Carson Wentz is the more talented player, and there are other parts to this story, including perhaps the coaching staff doing a better job because they feel, that's the human nature aspect of it, Mike, I kind of talked about yesterday from the player standpoint, where they see the backup is in there, and all of a sudden they know they need to focus. You have the same thing from the coaching staff as well. So maybe things just got sharper because they had to get sharper.
Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. John McMullen on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Follow him at JF McMullen on Twitter as a lot looking at that offense. And, a lot of it, too, I wonder how much they think they can do more because of Darren Sproles being back. Have you noticed a difference with his addition?
Yeah, I mean, how much I've talked to you guys about that is that Doug Peterson loves Darren Sproles. He loves him. He loves him. He loves him. And for good reason. I mean, that's a very, very good player for a lot of years that can do a lot of different things. The issues, obviously, over the past two seasons have been all injury-related. Now he's finally getting healthier, and he's been able to stay not only on the field for the past couple of games, but also the practice field. And as things get tenser and tenser, and if you're seeing a close game on Sunday and there's a big spot, you're going to see Darren Sproles in a key situation because Doug trusts him, and he certainly trusts him more than a rookie like Josh Adams or sort of a journeyman now, veteran in Wendell Smallwood. Yeah, I mean, if Darren Sproles can keep staying healthy and the Eagles keep moving on, you're going to see incrementally more and more each week.
What about real quick on the defensive side of the ball? I know a lot of people asking about Avonte Maddox and him just kind of solidifying that outside spot, or at least last game. Is that where they view him moving forward? Like if Sidney Jones comes back, is he kind of in no man's land again?
Yeah, I don't know. I tried to get Jim to bite on that because, I mean, it's pretty obvious that if you look at Avonte and his history, he was an outside corner at Pitt. But the NFL is very similar to quarterback. If you think about it, you can be a great player at quarterback, but if you're 5'11", they're going to downgrade you. You could be a great corner, but if you're 5'8", 5'9", like Avonte Maddox, you're going to get downgraded. You're going to get pigeonholed as a nickel corner, And that's what the Eagles tried to turn him into in training camp. Then they had the injuries at safety. He was forced back there. Only because they had more injuries and they needed an outside corner, they kind of threw him out there against the Rams. And remember, he didn't even practice. He got cleared on Friday. And he was phenomenal. That's the best game any Eagles corner has had all year, including Ronald Darby, including Jalen Mills, everybody. That is the best game an Eagles corner has played all year. He was lights out. And I remember back in the draft, a personnel guy told me if he was 6 foot tall, this is a first-round pick. And that's the kind of talent he has as far as coverage ability. Now, the question is, look, if that's Josh Reynolds, who's a pretty good receiver, but if that's Mike Evans, if that's Julio Jones, if that's Mike Williams, these big, rangy receivers, yeah, you're going to have an issue at times. DeAndre Hopkins is coming in this week. That might be the best receiver in pro football. But there have been guys, Brent Grimes, who I brought up to Jim, Chris Harris. These have been Pro Bowl level corners who are really small and have played on the outside. I think Avonte can do it. And it's sort of like any other position. If you're coming off a game like that, you're not taking him out of that position, whether Sidney Jones is going to play or not. And the second part is Sidney Jones isn't going to play this week. So this week, at least, Avonte Maddox is going to be your starting left corner again.
We'll see how he holds up, matched up against a tough one, maybe the best in all the league right now. DeAndre Hopkins, he is a handful. This is one of the tougher matchups that they would have seen. Cooper gave him some problems, but Hopkins is even on another level.
Oh, yeah. Hopkins is in if you're talking best receiver, you bring up certain names. Julio Jones is one, and Hopkins is in that category. If he's not one, he's 1A. And you can argue in a lot of ways. If you ask me who the best receiver is, I will say Hopkins. And the reason why is because not only throughout his career, now they finally have Deshaun Watson, he's been able to perform with all these terrible quarterbacks and still put up these massive numbers because he's just dominant. And you see the way he high points the football. Jim compared it to Charles Barkley as a rebounder. He's got incredibly strong hands. He's a great route runner. This is one of those where you kind of know he's going to get his, so you got to stop everybody else, and we'll see if the Eagles are able to do it.
John McMullen back tomorrow with more on NFL Week 16, which is kicking off here on Saturday this week. The Thursday night games are in the books. We'll have all the action for you right here on 97.3 ESPN. The Saturday schedule's back, and we have Eagles-Texans. Countdown to kickoff starts at 10 a.m. Sunday morning live from the Rusty Nail in K-May. John, appreciate it, pal.
All right, thanks, Mike.